Well, it is 7 p.m. and as advertised, we are doing a live interview with a candidate for Ottawa County, Michigan's prosecutor position. And what I'm going to be doing through this cycle, through election day, is I'm going to be interviewing liberty minded candidates. It's a little different. Most people just come on and you hear and you decide if they align with you. Well, you know that I will only give the voice to those that are going to uphold their oath and respect individual liberty, our natural, our God given rights. And if anyone has paid attention to what's going on in this country, we know we have a massive problem with the Soros organization and other big leftist donors are weaponizing prosecutors around this country. It has led to a trickle down effect of a violation of parental rights, property rights. In California, New York, you see, there's rules on if there's theft up to a certain amount, they're not going to prosecute. What this does is it foster enables other people to commit acts against, again, property rights, individual rights. And if anyone knows me and has been following me, I am a lifetime member of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. And what I do is I'm about police accountability and also fostering the respect that is needed in the position to make sure that we have people in uniform that are working cohesively with prosecutors and judges, making sure that we have key people in uniform protecting us and upholding our rights for us. And the big question is, and we saw this through, are the right people going to run and are we stand behind those that are running to make sure they will be the liaison between upholding the law while making sure that none of those laws are violating our constitutional rights. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Greg in, but I just want you to know that Greg has been an attorney. He has 17 years of experience, and I've met him. I've gotten to know him. That's why I wanted to bring him on here to kick off this whole candidate interview up to election day and make sure that this is comfortable. And for those of you that are watching, I am not an echo chamber in the conservative realm. I'm actually a moderate that leans conservative, and my audience comes from all walks of the political spectrum. But one thing that really unites everyone is we cannot deny, one, the economy, and two, the border issue. And again, the crime that is happening that is having no accountability, that again is threatening our individual rights. So, Greg, I want to bring you on. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Um, looks like I have a little thing here in the background. Let me get it out. This is the fun thing about live um, interviews. Do you see that graphic in the background?
I do not, but
Okay.
thank you for having
Well,
me.
let's do this. Yeah, I would love to hear about you personally. I know me as an activist, as a scientist, I spent 9 years on active duty. And I always say, as cringy as it sounds to some people, cookie cutter, my oath doesn't expire, but I do what I do for my children. I have an almost 20-year-old and an 8-year-old who thinks she's 28. But why don't you tell us a little about your home life and your family?
So, my wife Crystal and I, we've been married for 26 years. We've got three little ones. Some of them aren't so little anymore. We homeschool all three of them. They range from 9 to my eldest just turned 16. So, as you mentioned, I've been a litigation attorney for 17 years at this point, but I'm also a small business owner, a firefighter, an emergency responder, and a former police officer. I'm also been the People's Choice Award winner here for the Grand Haven Tribune almost every year since I founded Polaris Law, both for best attorney and best law firm. And now I've decided, obviously, like you said, to run for Ottawa County Prosecutor.
When you just said that you're kind of cross-credentialed and being a former law enforcement officer and working in firefighting, I love that because in my experience, I've worked in emergency response, and when there's like, we just saw like the Macomb County explosion, and about incident command, and a lot of people don't know that there's infighting between emergency responders sometimes. And
Right.
it's nice that you've kind of wear a multi hat, because to me that showcases you respect the method behind the madness. And when people know and understand what's happening in individual aspects, kind of a multidisciplinary response, you have more cohesiveness. So I didn't realize that about you, and that's just great to know. Well, what I was saying in my introduction before bringing you on is that all around the country, we have seen a huge rise in crime, theft in stores where places like Walgreens and I believe it was Walmart are just shutting their businesses down. Or in some cities, I mean, you can't even grab a stick of deodorant without having an employee having to come unlock the cabinet. And it's just because the prosecutors in large cities that are run by Democratic leaders are making it to where people do not have any fear of accountability. And I would love to hear one, do you agree and recognize that? And what do you say to your colleagues who are not upholding their oath? And how would you handle those issues in our county?
Well, unfortunately, it's not just very left leaning prosecutors in big cities. I've been talking to law enforcement all over the state, at least. And despite whether they run as Republicans or whether they run as Democrats, honestly, it looks like some of the more Republican prosecutors are actually even worse at
Oh,
what
wow.
the most of the deputies and police officers that I've talked to call the catch and release policy, which essentially has, the perp or the bad guy, they call him the bad guy usually, back out on the street before the police report's even done. And that was one of the things that, as the more people I talked to in law enforcement about running, that was one of their number one concerns was just putting an end to this catch and release policy. And you can even take a look at Ottawa County here. They have, the current prosecutor's office has, some pretty substantial catch and release policies where, unless you can prove the entire case at the time you're starting the investigation and asking for the warrant, they'll generally deny it. And it's very frustrating for those guys who, just want to do their jobs, but it's also had an effect on morale, and it's obviously having an effect at this point on the crime rates in this county.
I've seen a stark change. I grew up in West Michigan. I was in the military for a long time, and I moved back to Ottawa County in 2015. And I just have to say, when I grew up here, it was all farmland and churches, and it has grown so much. And with that growth, we have seen what we call transplants coming from other areas. In my neighborhood alone, we have a lot of people that came from California, and so our voting demographic has changed, but we are one of the reddest counties in the country. But if any of us have watched any of the counter commissioners meetings, we have seen some well-known, I call them hacktivists, that like to speak up for progressive policies. And there's nothing wrong with the difference in belief systems, but when those belief systems violate parental rights, violate the overreach of government, and that's one thing I read on your bio. Your website has a really good information to kind of get to know you. And that's why I want to bring you on to expound that. But I wanted to learn some things about you that I have not yet seen in media. And one of those is, can you just kind of explain in your career without violating any attorney client privilege of any challenging situations where, you've had to kind of deal with challenging cases that were kind of out of the norm, and how did you overcome them, and what was the resolution, and basically what special legal skills or loopholes have you utilized to handle some of these kind of off-ball cases?
So that's kind of a multifaceted question, but
It is.
I think the first case that pops to mind, it actually involves varying levels of criminal and civil and some other things on the side, but I won't get into that. There was a builder, and this builder owned a very successful construction company. And he hired a very trusted person to be the bookkeeper. And the bookkeeper ended up hiring a very trusted person to be the accountant. And on that watch, the bookkeeper ended up stealing well over $1 million, embezzling. And they initially came to me for help. We started, insulating things, running the numbers, putting things together and getting law enforcement involved. And it was complicated enough that law enforcement didn't really know what to do with it. And so it kind of took a back seat for a couple years as far as the law enforcement side goes. And they got really frustrated with the lack of justice on that end. Eventually, we started putting together a civil case uh, where we could do the work, I could do the work, and I could present it to the court. And ultimately, it got to the court. And when the judge found out where we were, we settled that, because then once we hand gift wrapped this case for the prosecutor's office, suddenly, they were interested in picking it up and running with it, as long as they could have all our work product. But prior to that, no dice. And that was like one of the big early wake up calls that I had, that something's not right, even in our super conservative Ottawa County, that if a crime of this magnitude could literally get swept under the carpet until it was essentially gift wrapped, what's really going on there?
And that's shocking because, I've lived in Ottawa County since 2015, but, other than what we dealt with in COVID, I was not following legal issues in our county. And that kind of segues into another question I want to ask you is what do you think are issues in Ottawa County that you as county prosecutor could help evade? So maybe some things under the radar that the average person doesn't know, but in your profession you see issues affecting our county.
Well, I think the number one issue our law enforcement boys, hit it right on the head. Catch and release. My first day on the job is over. We're not just going to throw things away because it's going to be too hard or too complicated, or we just don't have the resources. The reality is that the resources are there, and it just the you need to better run the ship. When you talk to the police and you see how much time is wasted, going back and forth between hearings, because everybody knows you settle it on the court steps or at the night of the final pretrial. Why can't we move things down? I will make it so that, my assistants will know their cases inside and out at every aspect of the case. My recommendation would be that they're involved early on in the case so that they can help shape the investigation if need be, so that they can offer legal assistance and guidance, and ultimately foster a relationship where, instead of just saying, hey guys, we're all on the same team, we actually work like it.
And, I think what is important, and I just want to, on the record, make sure people know this is me saying this. This is not you saying this, unless you agree. And I'm not trying to put you on the hot seat, but I feel currently the sheriff that we have seems to lean in a way that works along with the catch and release. And as someone who's a lifetime member of CSPOA, I think it's so important. Our sheriffs hold so much power. And if you think about what we saw during COVID, I mean, think about Marlena. It's a nationally known story for those that are following me outside the state of Michigan. Restaurants that stayed open, and not only did they stay open, but a lot of people, businesses that stayed open, reached out to people in my profession, which is a realm of public health, and we gave them advice on how to open safely. But what I want to know is we had the weaponization of our sheriffs and our state attorney general. How would you handle a situation with Marlena's Bistro or the Libertas School here in Ottawa County? I mean, I went there to help the administrator because, and they had padlocks on the door. Like the health department literally shut them down. What would your rights be as a prosecutor, and what could you do to step in when you see this type of what I believe is malicious prosecution that is violating actually the known science, but individual rights of business owners?
So, to answer that question, first of all, I would like to point out that, the prosecutor's office is there, and the sheriff's department is there, and the different police departments are there to enforce laws. What we were dealing with at the time were unconstitutional mandates that came from, essentially the governor's office. Now, I know I've been called out for saying that, well, saying that those were unconstitutional, that's just a conservative right wing opinion, or it's a radical opinion. But the reality is that it's simply a statement of Michigan law. Our Supreme Court actually held that the initial mandates were unconstitutional back in, I think it was October of 2020. And when she
Mhm.
reissued those orders again through DHHS, the Court of Appeals held those unconstitutional. So it's not a radical opinion. It's reality, despite the people that don't want to hear that. And our current prosecutor's office, even though these unconstitutional mandates were unconstitutional, and even though they were not laws, they took it upon themselves to use the power of their office while letting everyone else get away with everything to threaten and actually charge people with crimes for not following those. So to answer your question, that's one of the things that I would do is I would not abuse the power of my office to enforce mandates. We would seek to enforce constitutional laws.
And that's music to my little libertarian ears. Um, but well, I'm actually like a Ron Paul Republican. That's my hero. Hopefully you know who that is.
I do.
um, but that is so great to hear because when you just said, like, you make these statements and the media spins it as it's a right-wing conservative extreme view, and it's like, why is freedom so offensive? And regardless of what party somebody is running on or belongs to, you take an oath to the Constitution, not your personal feelings. And that's where, for me, in my realm, I, as an activist, I tell people I will stand up for people to do things, whether it's doing horrible things to an American flag. I personally think that's horrible, but I totally support people's right to do things. And if they owned that flag, they're not really breaking a law because it's their property. Now, you steal someone's flag and do something to it, but I don't pick or choose liberty and my oath to the Constitution.
Well,
And I
it's funny.
hope that you get that. You can't be selective about the Constitution. You support people's rights to do moronic things, right?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned specifically, the desecration of a flag, because I am aware of someone who had a neighbor come onto their property, which is trespassing, and they
Mhm.
maliciously destroyed the property of their flag, and our current prosecutor's office declined to charge.
See, and that's the big issue. I always tell people when we have these discussions, you have to kind of remove your emotions. Most people, if you say, you defecate on a flag or something, which I remember seeing at a rally in New York, that is heinous. That's horrible. Not only but it's a public display of something else. But if that person bought that flag, hey, it's their right, although I completely disagree with it. But they steal someone else's flag, and we deal with that right now. I'm a big supporter of Ottawa Impact and our commissioners here in Ottawa County, and we have signs stolen and defaced all the time. And I always say I support people's rights to be morons as long as they're not harming another person or their property. And I do
Right.
believe that's how the law is designed. If long as you have like First Amendment protections, but that is what you just stated is an exact issue is the selective enforcement because although people have a First Amendment right to do ridiculous things, it was wrong by doing it to somebody else's property. And when you have that selective enforcement, it's a clear violation of the oath of office. I wish there was more accountability for those that violate their oath. I mean, we have accountability for people who perjure themselves on a stand. If you are raising your right hand and you're taking an oath of office for the government, I people can choose to turn their heads, but when there's actually a victim, we are supposed to stand up and protect the rights of others. And I just want
Absolutely.
to keep bringing up the situation of what we dealt with COVID because in a perfect world, if we had a very constitutional sheriff and a constitutional prosecutor, I kind of feel like Ottawa County would have had like a protection bubble over it. And our county is doing so much where the bellwether, even though bad press follows, our county, it's because we are doing things that nobody else is doing and the hornet's nest has been kicked.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I would like to hear from you. I try to have good taste when we talk about people that are running alongside you or against you. Now, I don't want to butcher her name, but Sarah M is what we will call her. I know that she has worked for the county prosecutor's office for, I believe, 22 years. And I want our folks that are watching to know she's been doing it for over 2 decades. What can you offer that you bring to the table that sets you apart from her?
So, as a lawyer, sometimes we answer questions with questions, and I'll kind of preface this answer with a question, and that's what good is all the experience in the world if you don't have good judgment? And the office that I've seen, the office that she's been the chief assistant of for the last 4 years, is not showing good judgment. The biggest case in point that seems to be the most out there right now in the social media circles is that, there was a mom charged with taking away her kid's cell phone, and
I gasped.
charged actually with stealing. She was charged with stealing. And, there's been some back and forth as to whether or not it was known whose phone it was or whether there was a gift. But the problem is this poor lady was, dragged through the criminal justice system for months. And if you listen to her attorney, she told the prosecutor, which actually was my opponent on the case, this whole time that no, this indeed was a gift. Okay. The problem is that Sarah says now, oh, well, we didn't know that until the day of the trial, and then I dismissed it. Well, the problem with that is twofold. First of all, you should know your case when you charge, not when you go to trial. That's number one that I would change. Number two is, if that's the way you're going to try things, you anybody with common sense would have read that police report and thought, wow, this sounds like a civil matter. This sounds like dad needs to go and talk to the judge about whatever this issue is. When you have custody battles or parenting issues, almost every cop out there has the common sense to say, you know what, this is civil. But for some reason in this case, somebody took it upon themselves to take this obvious civil case and try to make it a crusade. And thankfully, at the end of the day, it sounds like dad came in and kind of put it to rest.
Well, I'm familiar with seeing that story on social media about Sarah M., who's running against you. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm asking you. Even I'm a parent. I have a daughter who's now an adult, but she's from my first marriage, and co-parenting. Like I always say, I'm the best ex-wife ever. But even when I grounded her from her phone, it was always except to talk to family because I would never. My children are not pawns. But my understanding is, if I am a guardian, I can take anything away from my child as long as I'm not restricting access to the other parent. I mean, we have iPads and we have phones. So if you're just saying, hey, you're grounded because of whatever behavior, I feel like what that did, even though she backpedaled, it's kind of telling young children that they can use the government against their parents. I mean, do you kind of get that sense? It reminds me of like people who get spanked. I mean, I believe in nonviolent parenting, but if someone's spanked and then they call 911,
Right.
we're
Right.
coming to a point, don't you think, where parents are kind of losing their ability to parent?
Well, we're absolutely coming to that point. But to be fair, N- I've dealt with this as, I do family law, I do civil law, business, real estate, probate, criminal. I run the gamut because I like litigation. And as long as you know the rules and you know the court cases to apply the rules, it all kind of works with the same thinking. And I don't know of very many other instances where this would have happened. My personal thought is that somebody had to have picked this up and done this on purpose, because most of the time these things, it's civil. A mom and a dad or an ex-wife, ex-husband, they have these debates, and it's almost always the police officer or somewhere, if it's important enough to go to the prosecutor, they say, you know what, this just isn't criminal. Or maybe it could be, but this is civil. You're going to have to go take it to the judge.
Mhm.
Especially when it comes to that co-parenting, which seems to be getting harder and harder for people to do as they're separated, because it's almost like each parent sometimes is trying to undermine the other, and it makes it just real difficult. And I have to give credit to our law enforcement, who are on the front lines dealing with these things, and generally having the discernment to not make mountains out of molehills in most circumstances.
And I think in general, we always, I mean, I went through, it was actually an amicable divorce a million years ago, a military marriage. And that is the father of my oldest daughter. And um, There was a little hiccup where we had to go back to court, and the judge even says, "Please try to resolve this amongst yourselves." And that's usually where like a mediator comes in. So I'm with you. I think it's weird to go from 0 to 100. Now, was this mother arrested and handcuffed?
I will leave her to tell her story, but that is, that's ultimately my understanding is that she actually had a very young, recently born child and was arrested, right in front of the family, and
Probably
the whole
while
event.
possibly even nursing or something like that, which, it goes back to what you had said with those situations is that you should know your case before you charge. And just even if, the police were peaceful in what they did, that can really cause PTSD. Like the average American who makes sure what they do is, most likely ethical and not harming anyone else, we don't ever anticipate ourselves being arrested or put in handcuffs. And even when you're found not guilty or charges are dropped, you Google that name and it sticks with you. And I think that's what people like in the position that you're going for. A prosecutor needs to know even just the accusation can ruin a reputation. And I want to ask you, do you think if you were to win your election and become the Ottawa County, Michigan prosecutor, do you think that that would kind of rein in more constitutionally minded law enforcement officers that understand the issues around our country to come to Ottawa County? Because I feel like if I was a Leo, I would want to make sure that people that I would work alongside, my prosecutor, my sheriff, because it is a multidisciplinary issue, the legal system. Do you think that would get good people to come to our county?
I definitely think it would help good people come to our counties. A lot of the police departments are doing a pretty decent job of that. Right now, though, we need to really elect a strong constitutional sheriff if, the sheriff's department is going to have, some of its employment and turnover issues addressed.
Well, I think I've really made it obvious here that I understand the importance of having a constitutional team here. I have learned about a gentleman in our county, Ottawa County, Michigan, John Anderson, that's running for sheriff. Are you familiar with Sheriff Anderson? And do you think he would be a good fit for Ottawa County?
He definitely seems to be a strong constitutional sheriff candidate.
Don't you think that's kind of crazy that we're sitting here discussing the importance of needing constitutional candidates? Because again, taking that oath, I mean, it's so clear as day, and it's like we've just come to a point where doing things that is the foundation of our whole founding of our government and our country, it's now so offensive and it's so extreme.
Well, it
I
was it, It was a weird situation for me because, COVID really woke me up, and that's when I got involved in politics. When I realized that, Ottawa County, like you said earlier, was strong conservative. It's notorious for being one of the more conservative counties in the state, if not the country. And yet we were one of the most draconian when it came to our COVID response. In fact, the deep blue Muskegon totally was much better off in terms of protecting liberties than we were here in Ottawa County. And so, really, when I started getting involved, I wanted to always stay behind the scenes. I never wanted to be the guy out front. And what happened is the Board of Commissioners here in the county started passing this constitutional county resolution. And I read that and I really wanted to get behind it because I've always been the constitutional kind of guy. My favorite Supreme Court justice was Antonin Scalia, and my current, favorite justice is Clarence Thomas. I've always
Me
liked
too.
the Constitution and what it stood for. And so I read about this, this constitutional county resolution, and I thought, wow, that's pretty incredible. And you read it and you see, oh, but in order to make this framework actually work, you have to have a strong sheriff and you have to have a strong prosecutor who are both going to uphold their oaths to protect and defend the constitutions of the state of Michigan and, of course, the United States. Well, at the same time this is going on, the legislature we lost in 2022 here in Michigan started passing all of these radical, out of control gun laws I believe there were over 16 public acts regulating or changing the way firearms are regulated in Michigan. And so I put together these constitutional town halls just to start advising the public, hey, here's these laws that have been passed, here's what's on the horizon, here's how it kind of looks constitutionally. Oh, by the way, call your prosecutor, find out where they stand on this issue. Call your sheriff, find out where they stand on this issue, because we need to make sure that we elect people that share our constitutional values if we're going to uphold them, if we're going to defend them. And I think I've done a pretty good job of trying to get the word out. And here we are now. I'm trying to get into the prosecutor's office. You got John and Mike Maycroft is another, appears to be a strong constitutional candidate. And, it's got everybody up in arms just because we like the Constitution. I never thought that would be radical. I mean, it's like the
I'm
founding document of this country. And suddenly that's a radical concept.
It it is absolutely, it's maddening. And I'm glad that you brought up the issue with what the democratically led, well, right now it's kind of in limbo, but for example, I think you and I have talked about this in person with these red flag gun laws. I mean, I'm a disabled veteran and I feel that these red flag gun laws coming out of Lansing actually target veterans. Um, I can tell you, I worked in a VA for many years, a VA healthcare system. And what happens is you get veterans who have PTSD, anxiety, depression. Um, are you still there? You got kicked out. All right, there you are. It's Whitmer got us. No. You went black for a second, but no, with the red flag gun laws. So working in the VA system and being a veteran myself, what I have found in having private conversation with veterans is they have PTSD, anxiety, or depression, and it doesn't mean that they're going to snap and they're unhinged. And there are. Do you know that there are more claims of PTSD in the VHA, the Veterans Healthcare Administration, for sexual assault versus combat?
Wow.
A lot of
I did
people
not
don't
know
know
that.
that. So when you hear of a veteran that is PTSD, like people picture them like rocking, afraid of fireworks, and they don't, and then oh my gosh, they shouldn't have a gun. But what happens is it's not. So I'm vocal about the fact I'm an SA survivor. I have PTSD. Would never hurt another person. I follow the non-aggression principle. I'm peaceful as can be. I believe in conflict resolution and administratively fighting, not through violence. And people are afraid to get help through the VA system because they're so afraid that some psychologist is going to say, oh, they shouldn't have guns. And that to me, you're talking with people who went in selflessly to uphold the rights of others to have their own rights taken away. So, do you see how that could disproportionately target veterans?
I would absolutely agree that that is a pretty significant risk. I think the other risk too is that, having dealt with, some pretty nasty family law cases, I think there's also a very strong likelihood that those, what they call them extreme risk protection orders, will likely be misused in order to try to gain advantage in custody cases. And honestly, just talking it through, I could see where, PTSD vet, you know, marriage and custody could
Mhm.
tie right into that, and it would be right for that. It's funny because
Yeah.
we're circling back to the experience, and that's another place where my opponent and I are radically different. I listened to her speak at a Second Amendment rally, and she was actually selling all the great benefits of these extreme risk protection orders and how they'll almost never be used here in Ottawa County. And I heard from the sheriff's department that it wasn't 24 hours before they were actually handed one to serve.
You know, I I too, given my issues, I need to know that I can protect my children. I need to know that I can protect my dwelling. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to be stuck with like ninja stars and scissors. But so I appreciate you bringing that up. As we do wrap this up, I did read that in your own description of why you were running, you said, if I'm correct, you actually got into law not to just be a lawyer, but you wanted to be a prosecutor. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. My intent for going to law school was to ultimately work for the prosecutor's office, but Unfortunately, I ended up graduating in 2007, right as our economy was kind of taking a hit. And a lot of the very well seasoned job attorneys were flocking to the prosecutor jobs, which normally those were entry level jobs. They're generally not the best paying. And recent law grads usually go there, get some experience, and then either decide to go career or go into criminal defense. And unfortunately, like I said, when I graduated, the lawyers that were kind of on the brink of making it or not were all flocking to those jobs. And by the time that sorted itself out, I never really, I we had ended up having children, and financially, I couldn't go back to an entry level job. But it's interesting because when COVID hit, it appears that a door that I thought was closed and closed permanently has now opened on a much bigger level than I ever thought was achievable. And obviously, by that I mean running for the top spot here in the county.
Well, I just on record, I want you to know you have my endorsement, and not to toot my own horn here, but I've been in the liberty realm for almost 14 years, and I have people asking for me to promote them and endorse them all around the country, congressional candidates, sheriffs, because I speak to, I say the liberty misfits. It's the people who necessarily aren't Republican, but they tend to vote Republican because they really fear the progressive leftist policies. So those are the people that I'm speaking to. And I really want people to understand how I have viewed the importance of county governance is picture a table with four legs. You have your prosecutor, your judges, your sheriffs, and your commissioners. And Ottawa County has been a very lopsided table. And I'm telling you, we just need a little bit more jacking up of these legs of the table and people like you that are throwing yourself into the fire, because we know in this county, we have some really awesome, in air quotes, media that likes to attack people who are constitutional. Again, I will never understand why that's bad. But I would like for you to just, as we close this out, where can people help you with your run? Where can people donate? Where can they get more information, whether it's social media or your website?
So my website is gregtodd.com, GregTodd.com. And there's a link to volunteer, there's a link to donate, there's a Facebook page and our X page. And, the more the merrier. I mean, I got into this, not expecting to run, but even though I'm running, I'm not thinking of this as it's not about me. It's about we, the people. Somebody had to step up and fill this role. And frankly, there aren't a lot of guys out there, attorneys, who are willing to work harder for less money. But the Constitution is important. I love liberty, and I'm willing to step up for we the people to protect your liberty, to protect your children's liberty, and their children's liberty. That's really what this campaign is about. And with the Constitution as my compass, I swear that these are the values that I intend to uphold, just as I swore to uphold and defend the Constitutions when I became a certified police officer, and again later in my career as an attorney.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me tonight. It's so funny. We're sitting here talking about freedom and liberty and how our government's supposed to run. And tonight we're going to watch, you know, Brandon himself give his State of the Union. Yeah, President Biden has his State of the Union, and I'm looking forward to watching Trump's live. I saw that he's going to give a live fact checking coverage, and whether or not people like Trump, I know it's going to be comical. And then Tucker Carlson on X is going to do a post. So this is a fun night of talking about liberty and freedom. I want
Sounds
to
like
thank
it.
you so much for joining me tonight. I am going to be reaching out to you behind the scenes. I want to help you any way I can, because I have differing views than a lot of the people you may speak to. Um, but I know that my views are never going to be fully mainstream. But if I'm going to have people in positions of government, I'm damn sure going to do my best to make sure we're getting people in that respect the Constitution, God given, and natural rights and individual liberty. So I am going to, for those that are watching, I am going to be taking this interview and putting it on my Rumble channel. Um, Probably by the end of the night tonight. So if anyone wants to share this, it should be saved on all platforms, but you can find it on Rumble on Kristen Megan TV Greg, thank you so much for joining me. I wish you the best. And just remember, if we have had problems in Ottawa County, Michigan, it sounds like we need a change. So elect Greg Todd for Ottawa County Prosecutor here in West Michigan. And I appreciate you so much. And in Liberty, I hope you have a great evening and go unite with that family and maybe grab some popcorn and watch this clown show with me at 9 p.m.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Thank you so much.